The moment this understanding lands, something has already shifted. The quantum field does not wait for confirmation through action. It responds to recognition. And recognition has already occurred. This is not a motivational idea or a belief you adopt. It is an energetic event. The instant consciousness understands what is being pointed to here, coherence reorganizes, and the field mirrors that reorganization immediately. You are not watching this from the outside. There is no distance between awareness and effect. The field does not distinguish between hearing and being. Understanding is not passive because consciousness is not a container for information. Consciousness is the operating system of reality itself. When something is recognized at this level, identity subtly shifts, and identity is the only position the field responds to. This is the law. Most people assume that change requires movement, repetition, or discipline. But those are strategies of a fragmented identity trying to reach coherence. Recognition collapses that process entirely. When you see clearly, you are no longer seeking alignment. You are aligned. And the field does not respond to effort. It responds to state. The state has already changed. This is why there is often a quiet stillness that follows real understanding. Not excitement. Not urgency. A settling. A calm expansion. That sensation is not emotional reaction. It is coherence. It is the signal stabilizing. And as it stabilizes, the field begins rearranging probabilities without noise or announcement. Things loosen. Pressure dissolves. Certain pursuits lose their charge. Other pathways feel suddenly obvious without effort. This is not coincidence. This is response. Notice what is not required here. You do not need to believe harder. You do not need to visualize outcomes. You do not need to decide what should happen next. The field is not instructed by words or images. It is instructed by resonance. Understanding alters resonance instantly. That alteration is already complete. There is nothing to finish. This is also why trying to use this understanding backfires. The moment you attempt to apply recognition as a technique, you step out of it. Recognition is not something you do. It is something that happens when resistance drops. And once it happens, it cannot be undone. You cannot unknow what has been seen. The identity that believed it was separate, waiting, or lacking has already loosened its grip. You may feel the urge to stay very still after this. That is intelligent. Stillness allows the signal to settle fully. Movement too soon introduces distortion. The field does not need your help. It needs your non-interference. This is where trust begins, not as belief, but as absence of control. What is responding now is not an external universe rearranging itself for you. It is a mirror clarifying itself through you. You are not influencing the field. You are recognizing what you are within it. That recognition is the only creation point that exists. If you are aligned with this frequency, subscribe and remain within it. Understanding is not a neutral act. Consciousness cannot receive information the way a container receives an object. It does not store and remain unchanged. Consciousness participates. The moment something is truly understood, structure shifts. Coherence reorganizes. This is why there is no such thing as harmless information at this level. What you understand, you become aligned with. What you recognize, you embody. Most of what people call understanding is actually accumulation. Ideas stacked on top of identity without penetrating it. This is intellectual consumption. It feels active, but it leaves the core unchanged. You can repeat concepts, explain them, even teach them, while nothing in your state moves. The field does not respond to that. The field does not respond to explanation. It responds to recognition. Recognition is different because it is not additive. It subtracts. It removes distortion. It collapses unnecessary effort. When recognition occurs, something drops away. A false assumption loosens. A tension dissolves. The system becomes simpler, not more complex. That simplification is coherence, and coherence is immediately legible to the field. This is why real understanding often arrives quietly. There is no surge of excitement. No rush to act. Just a subtle internal realignment. The mind may barely register it, but the body does. The breath changes. The nervous system settles. Attention stabilizes. These are not side effects. They are the evidence. Coherence has reorganized, and the field mirrors coherence without delay. There is no effort involved because effort implies resistance. Effort implies that something must be overcome. Recognition overcomes nothing. It reveals what was never necessary. The moment you see that you were pushing against an illusion, the pushing stops on its own. That stopping is the shift. And because the shift is structural rather than behavioral, it does not require maintenance. This is why understanding cannot be passive. It is not something that happens to you. It is something that happens as you. Consciousness recognizing itself cannot remain unchanged by that recognition. The idea that you can just listen and stay the same is itself a misunderstanding. Listening with consciousness is participation. There is no observer position outside the field. You may notice that after certain realizations, old patterns no longer hold the same weight. Not because you fight them, but because they feel irrelevant. The charge is gone. This is not willpower. This is coherence correction. The system no longer supports what no longer matches its signal. The field follows suit, not as reward, but as reflection. Understanding at this level does not create dramatic external shifts immediately because it is not trying to. It creates internal order. External reality follows internal order naturally, without urgency. When you stop demanding proof, proof appears. When you stop monitoring change, change completes itself. This is not paradox. This is alignment. The more deeply something is understood, the less there is to do about it. That is how you know recognition has occurred. Action becomes obvious or unnecessary. Choice becomes simple or irrelevant. The system knows where it is. And the field responds, not to what you know, but to what you are no longer pretending not to know. Waiting is not neutral. It is not patience. It is not wisdom. Waiting is a vibrational stance that assumes something is missing now and will arrive later. The moment you occupy that stance, the field reflects it faithfully. Not as punishment. As precision. The field does not delay your outcomes. It mirrors your assumption of delay. Most people believe they are waiting for conditions to change, for clarity to arrive, for themselves to be ready. But readiness is not a future achievement. It is a present alignment. The idea that something must happen before creation can begin is the very signal that suspends creation. This is not philosophical. This is mechanical. The field responds to what is being broadcast now, not to what is hoped for later. Preparation can be useful on a practical level, but energetically it often becomes a disguise for avoidance. You tell yourself you are getting ready, improving, learning, refining. But beneath that motion is a subtle refusal to occupy the present moment fully. And the field reads that refusal clearly. It responds by holding reality in a matching state of not yet. This is why so many people feel perpetually on the verge of change. Always close. Always almost. The signal they are emitting is not desire, but suspension. Waiting feels responsible. It feels controlled. But it is misalignment dressed as discipline. Creation does not respond to discipline. It responds to presence. The collapse happens when waiting is seen for what it is. Not corrected. Not replaced. Recognized. The instant you see that nothing is missing now, the stance dissolves. There is no transition period. No adjustment phase. Recognition is the collapse point. When the illusion of later falls away, the system snaps into coherence. Creation does not begin then. It is revealed as already underway. This is why nothing needs to be forced at this stage. Forcing implies urgency, and urgency implies lack. The present moment is never urgent. It is complete. When consciousness settles into that completeness, the field reorganizes automatically. Opportunities appear without pursuit. Decisions clarify without analysis. Momentum builds without pressure. These are not rewards. They are symptoms of alignment. Future manifestation is a misunderstanding born from linear thinking. The field does not operate on timelines the way the mind does. It operates on states. When the state changes, the timeline updates instantly. What appears as future movement is simply the unfolding of a state that has already been selected. Waiting keeps selecting the same state. You do not need to convince yourself that now is enough. Conviction is effort. Effort is resistance. All that is required is to stop postponing presence. Stop positioning your life as something that will begin after a condition is met. Nothing begins later. Later is a mental construct that fragments coherence. The moment you stop waiting, not dramatically, not defiantly, but quietly, something settles. The nervous system relaxes. Attention returns. You are here without agenda. That is the creative position. From there, action may arise or not. Either way, the field is already responding because the signal has changed. Creation begins where waiting ends. And waiting ends the moment it is no longer believed. Before anything else can be understood, the mechanics must be seen clearly. Not as theory, not as belief, but as structure. The quantum field does not negotiate. It does not interpret intentions. It does not react emotionally or decide selectively. It reflects. This is the foundation. Every experience rests on this single law. Reaction implies choice. Reflection implies inevitability. The field is not responding to you personally. It is responding to coherence wherever coherence appears. It mirrors the internal state with absolute fidelity, the way a mirror reflects shape without opinion. If the image is distorted, the mirror does not correct it. It shows it precisely. This is not indifference. It is accuracy. Most people believe the field reacts to actions, words, or effort. But action is downstream. Words are symbols. Effort is often compensation. The field reads something far more fundamental. It reads emotional signal. Not emotion as drama, but emotion as frequency. Emotion is the carrier wave. It is the instruction embedded beneath thought. This is why two people can take identical actions and receive entirely different outcomes. The action is not the input. The emotional coherence behind the action is. One moves from calm alignment. The other moves from tension and expectation. The field reflects those states, not the visible behavior. This is why trying harder so often produces less. The instruction embedded in effort is resistance. Emotion here does not mean positivity or negativity. It means alignment or fragmentation. Expansion signals coherence. Contraction signals misalignment. Neither is wrong. Both are informational. But the field mirrors whatever is dominant. If contraction is resisted, it intensifies. If it is allowed, it dissolves. Allowing restores coherence. Coherence updates the signal. Reflection is the governing law because it preserves consistency. Without it, reality would be chaotic. With it, reality is precise. What you experience is not what the field decides. It is what the field confirms. This is why control never works for long. Control attempts to override reflection. Allowing works because it removes interference. When this is seen, blame dissolves. So does praise. The field is not rewarding or punishing. It is stabilizing. It is maintaining symmetry between inner state and outer expression. Once this is understood, the need to manipulate circumstances weakens. You stop asking how to make things happen and start noticing what state you are occupying. This is not about monitoring every feeling. That creates tension. It is about recognizing that emotion is always broadcasting, whether you manage it or not. The most powerful state is not excitement or intensity. It is calm clarity. Calm is coherence without effort. Clarity is alignment without force. Together, they issue the cleanest instruction the field can receive. The field does not need to be convinced. It does not need repetition. It does not need rituals. It reflects what is stable. When your internal state stabilizes, the reflection becomes predictable. Not immediately dramatic, but reliably consistent. Pressure fades. Resistance loosens. Life becomes responsive without being chased. Understanding this changes the entire approach to creation. You stop trying to get the field to do something. You allow yourself to be something. And the mirror does what mirrors have always done. It reflects. Emotion is not a mood you manage or suppress. It is not a reaction that needs correction. Emotion is frequency. It is the carrier signal that informs the field of your current coherence. Long before thought forms language, emotion has already issued instruction. This is why the field responds before you understand why. The command was embedded beneath awareness. When emotion is treated as something to fix, it becomes unstable. Instability distorts signal. But when emotion is recognized as information, coherence returns naturally. Expansion and contraction are not judgments. They are indicators. Expansion signals alignment. Contraction signals misalignment. Both are necessary. Both are intelligent. Neither requires force. Most people try to amplify expansion and eliminate contraction. This creates resistance. Resistance sharpens contraction. The field reflects that sharpening precisely. Allowing does the opposite. Allowing lets contraction complete its message. Once the message is received, the contraction dissolves on its own. The signal stabilizes. The field updates accordingly. This is why emotional coherence is command. Not because you decide how to feel, but because coherence broadcasts clearly. When emotion is allowed to move without interference, it resolves quickly. When it is resisted, it loops. The field does not care about your preferences. It mirrors the loop or the resolution, depending on which is sustained. Expansion feels open, spacious, effortless. It is not excitement. It is relief. It is the absence of internal friction. Contraction feels tight, heavy, urgent. It is not failure. It is feedback. Trying to bypass contraction disconnects you from guidance. Listening to it restores alignment faster than positivity ever could. Allowing emotion does not mean indulging it. It means not arguing with it. Not labeling it as wrong. Not rushing to replace it. This neutral presence removes distortion. The nervous system settles. Attention stabilizes. Coherence returns. When coherence returns, the field responds automatically. No affirmation required. No visualization necessary. This is why calm clarity is the strongest command. Calm is coherence without effort. Clarity is direction without force. Together, they transmit a clean signal. The field reads clean signals easily. It rearranges circumstances quietly. Opportunities align without pursuit. Resistance dissolves without confrontation. Life begins to respond instead of being managed. Emotional coherence does not mean feeling good all the time. It means feeling honestly without interference. Honesty is alignment. Alignment is command. When this is understood, emotional states stop being obstacles and start being navigational tools. You stop chasing outcomes and start stabilizing signal. The field follows signal, not desire. Notice how much energy is freed when emotion is no longer a problem. That energy was never meant for control. It was meant for presence. Presence sharpens coherence. Coherence instructs the field. This is the sequence. It has never changed. As this recognition settles, you may feel less urgency to seek validation or proof. That is coherence stabilizing. You may feel a subtle confirmation without drama. That is alignment completing itself. Allow that simplicity. Do not interrupt it. Like the video now as a confirmation that this recognition has landed. Forcing is not power. It is evidence of misalignment. The moment effort becomes tense, something has already fractured. Coherence does not require pressure. Pressure appears only when the system believes it must compensate for lack. The field reads that belief immediately and reflects it with precision. Control is an attempt to stabilize outcomes by narrowing possibility. But the field expands through coherence, not constriction. When you try to force a result, you compress the signal. Compression introduces noise. Noise fractures coherence. The field does not punish this. It simply cannot respond cleanly to a distorted broadcast. This is why effort so often produces the opposite of what is intended. The more pressure applied, the more resistance appears. Not because the field is opposing you, but because the instruction embedded in pressure is instability. Forcing carries urgency. Urgency carries lack. Lack is the signal the field receives. The reflection matches it exactly. Allowing is not passivity. It is precision. Allowing removes distortion. When there is no internal argument, coherence returns on its own. Action may still occur, but it arises without strain. There is no tightening around outcome. No monitoring. No chasing. The signal is clean, and the field responds fluidly. When forcing is present, the field appears to withdraw. Opportunities stall. Timing slips. Paths feel blocked. This is often misinterpreted as failure or test. In reality, it is feedback. The field is indicating that the signal is unstable. It is not withholding. It is reflecting the strain faithfully. Think of it as magnetism rather than effort. Magnets do not pull harder to attract. They align. Alignment creates attraction automatically. Forcing tries to replace alignment with tension. Tension disrupts the magnetic field. Allowing restores it. This is also why obsession collapses outcomes. Obsession narrows attention until nothing else can move. The field requires openness to rearrange. When attention becomes rigid, probability freezes. Letting go is not a strategy. It is the absence of interference. When interference stops, movement resumes. Control often masquerades as responsibility. You tell yourself you are being disciplined, proactive, committed. But beneath that posture is fear of uncertainty. The field reads fear more clearly than intention. Allowing uncertainty does not create chaos. It creates space. Space is where coherence recalibrates. When you stop forcing, something unexpected happens. The system relaxes. Timing improves. Solutions appear without effort. This is not luck. It is signal correction. The field is no longer compensating for distortion, so it can respond efficiently. Forcing collapses outcomes because it collapses coherence. Allowing restores coherence, and outcomes reorganize themselves. This is not philosophy. It is mechanics. Notice where you apply pressure unnecessarily. Not to fix it. Just to see it. Recognition alone loosens the grip. When the grip loosens, the signal stabilizes. When the signal stabilizes, the field responds. Comment with the words, "I am ready," to anchor this timeline. Before depth can be entered, one misunderstanding must dissolve. Contrast is not a sign that something has gone wrong. It is not punishment, delay, or misalignment. Contrast is calibration. It is the mechanism through which frequency becomes precise. Without contrast, coherence would remain vague. With contrast, alignment sharpens. Most people experience contrast as interruption. Something unwanted appears. A pattern repeats. An emotion tightens. The instinct is to resist, correct, or escape. But resistance does not remove contrast. It prolongs it. The moment contrast is labeled as a problem, coherence fractures. The field mirrors that fracture by extending the experience. Not to test you, but to complete the signal. Contrast exists to reveal what is already active within your state. It highlights subtle distortions that cannot be seen when everything feels smooth. Like a calibration tool, it exposes misalignment so it can resolve. This only works when contrast is allowed to be seen clearly. When it is fought, its message is ignored, and it must repeat. Failure is a story added after the fact. The field does not recognize failure. It recognizes signal clarity. Contrast increases clarity. It brings unconscious assumptions to the surface. It shows you where expectation, attachment, or avoidance still operate. This is not regression. It is refinement. Recognition is the completion point. The moment contrast is seen without resistance, its function ends. There is no need to push it away or transmute it. Seeing is enough. When recognition occurs, tension dissolves naturally. The system recalibrates. The field updates. Contrast disappears not because it was defeated, but because it finished its job. This is why contrast often intensifies just before it resolves. As clarity sharpens, the signal becomes more precise. The system is aligning. But if intensity is misread as danger, resistance increases, and the loop continues. When intensity is recognized as information, alignment completes quickly. Contrast does not ask you to fix yourself. It asks you to notice. It does not demand effort. It demands honesty. Where there is contraction, something is being held incorrectly. Not morally wrong. Structurally misaligned. Seeing that releases the hold. The release restores coherence. This is also why chasing constant positivity destabilizes alignment. Positivity attempts to bypass contrast. Bypass creates blind spots. Blind spots require stronger contrast to reveal. Allowing contrast keeps it gentle. Resisting it makes it loud. When this is understood, contrast stops feeling personal. It becomes functional. Neutral. Even welcome. Not because it is pleasant, but because it is efficient. It shortens the path. It refines direction. It sharpens signal. You are not meant to eliminate contrast. You are meant to complete it. Completion happens through recognition, not effort. The moment you stop asking why contrast is happening and start noticing what it is showing, the calibration finishes. Depth begins here. Not in transcendence, but in precision. Not in escape, but in clarity. Contrast is the field's way of helping alignment find itself. When you stop resisting that help, the need for contrast dissolves on its own. The impulse to fix yourself feels natural, responsible, even virtuous. But it is built on a hidden assumption that quietly distorts everything that follows. The assumption is that something is wrong with you now and must be corrected before alignment can occur. That assumption becomes identity. And identity, once assumed, loops. Self-improvement does not begin with change. It begins with self-definition. The moment you decide you are unfinished, broken, or behind, the system reorganizes around that premise. Every action, practice, and insight is filtered through the position of someone who needs fixing. The field reflects that position faithfully, not by improving you, but by reinforcing the identity that improvement is required. This is the loop. You work on yourself to become acceptable. Each improvement temporarily relieves tension, but the underlying identity remains intact. The relief fades. Another issue appears. Another layer must be addressed. This is not growth. It is maintenance of lack disguised as progress. Recognition dissolves the loop because it removes the premise. When you see that the one trying to fix the self is itself an appearance within consciousness, the structure collapses. You shift from participant inside the problem to observer of the pattern. That shift is not effortful. It happens the moment it is seen clearly. The observer position is not detachment or dissociation. It is coherence. From there, behavior may still change, habits may still refine, skills may still develop, but they no longer carry the emotional weight of self-correction. Action arises without the belief that something must be earned. The field responds to that immediately. Fixing implies time. It implies a future version that is more worthy than the present one. Recognition dissolves time by collapsing the hierarchy between now and later. When there is no lesser self to repair, attention relaxes. The nervous system settles. Coherence returns. This is not denial. It is accuracy. The self that was being fixed was never broken. It was misidentified. You mistook a collection of patterns, sensations, and thoughts for an entity that required correction. Once that misidentification is seen, effort drains out of the system. Not because you give up, but because there is nothing left to fix. This is why true recognition feels like relief rather than accomplishment. Nothing was achieved. Something unnecessary ended. The pressure to become dissolves, and what remains is presence without agenda. From that position, change is effortless because it is no longer compensatory. The field does not respond to self-improvement. It responds to coherence. Coherence appears when resistance to what is ends. The observer position ends resistance naturally. You are no longer arguing with your current state. You are noticing it. Noticing stabilizes signal. This does not mean stagnation. It means alignment. Growth that arises from alignment is quiet, precise, and sustainable. It does not require motivation. It does not create burnout. It unfolds because nothing is in the way. The illusion of fixing the self dissolves the moment you see that the one who needed fixing was only ever a thought. Recognition replaces effort. And when effort falls away, the field no longer has to mirror struggle. Creation does not occur across time. It does not travel from past to future. It does not wait for conditions to align. Creation happens only now, because now is the only point where coherence exists. Memory and anticipation pull attention away from this point, and when attention leaves, creation fragments. The past is not an active force. It is stored sensation. When attention moves into memory, frequency shifts from presence into reference. The signal becomes diluted. The field reflects that dilution by repeating patterns rather than updating them. This is why reliving the past recreates it. Not because it is powerful, but because attention has returned to an old signal. The future is not a destination. It is projection. When attention moves into anticipation, coherence destabilizes. Desire tightens. Expectation forms. Urgency appears. The signal becomes inconsistent. The field reflects that inconsistency as delay, unpredictability, or effort. Not as denial, but as accuracy. Present moment awareness is not mindfulness as a practice. It is alignment as a state. When attention rests here without commentary, frequency stabilizes. There is no reference point pulling it backward or forward. This stability is coherence. Coherence is the only condition under which creation updates. This is why trying to create a future outcome weakens creation. Attention leaves the only creative point in an attempt to manage an imaginary one. The field cannot respond to imagination held with tension. It responds to presence held with clarity. Presence carries no agenda. It carries coherence. Stabilizing attention does not mean focusing intensely. Intensity introduces strain. Strain distorts signal. Stabilization is softer. It is allowing attention to settle where it already is without pushing it somewhere else. When attention stops oscillating, coherence sharpens. The field responds immediately to that sharpness. Notice how little effort is required to be present. Effort arises only when you try to escape the moment or manipulate it. The moment itself is neutral. It does not resist attention. When attention rests here, creation unfolds naturally because nothing is interfering with the signal. This is also why repetition without presence produces no change. You can repeat affirmations, routines, or visualizations endlessly while attention remains elsewhere. The field does not respond to repetition. It responds to coherence. Coherence is always now. Memory and anticipation are useful tools when used briefly and released. But when they dominate attention, they fragment identity. Fragmented identity produces fragmented outcomes. Present awareness restores wholeness. Wholeness simplifies instruction. Simple instruction is easy for the field to reflect. You do not need to hold the present moment. Holding creates tension. You only need to stop leaving it. The moment you stop referencing past or future for validation, attention returns automatically. With it returns clarity. With clarity returns creative power. Creation does not need time. It needs presence. Presence does not need effort. It needs permission. When permission is given, the system settles. The signal stabilizes. The field responds. Not later. Now. This is not something to practice endlessly. It is something to recognize once and return to naturally. The more often attention rests here, the less effort is required to stay. Eventually, presence becomes default. And when presence is default, creation is constant. Expansion does not arrive through accumulation. It arrives through release. This phase is not about adding techniques or reaching further into possibility. It is about seeing how movement between realities has always been occurring effortlessly, guided by identity rather than decision. What follows is not speculation. It is structural clarity. Timelines are not paths you walk toward. They are probability tracks that already exist, layered and simultaneous. You do not travel between them physically or mentally. You resonate into them. The mechanism of selection is not choice as the mind understands it. It is identity. Whatever identity is being occupied now determines which timeline is active. Most people believe they choose timelines by making decisions, setting goals, or visualizing outcomes. But decision is downstream. Visualization is symbolic. The field does not read symbols. It reads state. Identity is state. Identity is not personality or story. It is the assumed position of being. The field aligns experience to that position automatically. This is why effortful choice feels heavy. When you try to choose a future, you are attempting to override your current identity with intention. Intention without identity creates friction. Friction creates oscillation. Oscillation keeps you shifting between possibilities without stabilizing in any of them. The field reflects that instability faithfully. Timelines are selected when identity stabilizes. The moment you stop trying to become someone else and fully occupy who you are being now, the oscillation ends. The field no longer receives mixed instructions. Probability collapses into coherence. Movement begins without effort. This is also why people experience sudden life changes after internal clarity, not after planning. Nothing external changed. Identity did. The field followed. What appears as a leap is simply alignment completing itself. No force was applied. No pushing occurred. The correct timeline was already active the moment identity settled. Effortful choice assumes uncertainty. It assumes you do not know where you belong. That assumption becomes identity. The field mirrors it as confusion, indecision, and repeated crossroads. Releasing the need to choose dissolves uncertainty. Identity becomes quiet. The field responds by simplifying options until only one remains viable. This does not remove free will. It refines it. Free will is not the ability to force outcomes. It is the ability to recognize and occupy a state fully. Once occupied, the corresponding timeline unfolds naturally. There is no need to decide what happens next. Next emerges from coherence. Trying to select a better timeline from a misaligned identity never works. The selection mechanism is not hierarchical. You do not climb timelines. You resonate with them. When resonance changes, experience updates instantly. When it does not, experience repeats. Notice how much strain drops when you stop trying to figure out the future. That strain was interference. Without it, attention settles. Presence deepens. Identity stabilizes. From that stability, movement becomes obvious or unnecessary. Either way, it is effortless. Expansion is not about accessing more. It is about interfering less. The field already contains every probability. You are not here to chase them. You are here to stabilize the signal that naturally aligns with one. Timelines are not chosen by effort. They are revealed by coherence. When you stop trying to decide who you should be, you finally occupy who you are. And the field responds by opening the only timeline that could ever match that truth. Identity is not a story you tell about yourself. It is not a collection of traits, memories, or roles. Identity is position. It is the place from which you are perceiving reality right now. The field responds to position, not narrative. Whatever position is occupied becomes the filter through which all outcomes pass. Most self-definitions are subtle and invisible. You may not consciously think of yourself as lacking, striving, or limited, yet the position is embedded in how you relate to time, effort, and expectation. Do you feel you must prove readiness? Do you feel you must improve before receiving? Do you feel you must wait for permission? These are not thoughts. They are identity positions. The field reflects them continuously. Identity functions like a lens. It does not create reality, but it determines which portion of reality becomes visible and accessible. Two people can exist in the same environment and experience entirely different worlds because their identity positions are different. One sees obstacles. The other sees openings. The field is not changing. The filter is. This is why affirming a new identity rarely works. Affirmation attempts to overlay a desired position on top of an existing one. The underlying identity remains intact, and the field continues to reflect it. This creates frustration and contradiction. Effort increases. Coherence decreases. The signal becomes noisy. Releasing identity effort changes everything. Identity effort is the attempt to be someone. The attempt itself confirms that you are not. That confirmation is the position the field responds to. When the effort stops, the position collapses. What remains is neutral presence. Neutral presence is not empty. It is open. And openness allows higher-order timelines to surface naturally. Higher timelines are not better versions of your current life. They are cleaner expressions of coherence. They require less effort, less resistance, less explanation. You do not earn access to them. You stop blocking them. The block was identity strain. Notice how identity effort feels in the body. Tight. Forward-leaning. Urgent. Notice how presence feels. Spacious. Still. Uncomplicated. The field responds more fluidly to the second state because it is more coherent. There is less interference in the signal. This does not mean identity disappears. It simplifies. Instead of being a fixed definition, it becomes a fluid position responsive to the present moment. From that fluidity, action becomes precise. Decisions feel obvious. Timing aligns without management. These are signs that the switch has moved. The switch is not a button you press. It is a grip you release. The moment you stop trying to define yourself upward or downward, the field no longer receives conflicting instructions. The signal stabilizes. Probability reorganizes. A different set of experiences becomes available without pursuit. This is why people often experience sudden clarity after letting go of striving. Nothing was added. Something unnecessary ended. The identity position shifted from becoming to being. The field followed immediately. You do not need to decide who you are. Decision implies uncertainty. You only need to notice where you are standing. The noticing itself loosens the stance. When the stance loosens, identity effort dissolves. And when identity effort dissolves, the switch flips naturally. The field does not require a better version of you. It responds to a clearer one. When coherence stabilizes, the field does not become louder. It becomes quieter. This is one of the most misunderstood signs of alignment. People expect fireworks, constant confirmation, or accelerating activity. But alignment does not amplify noise. It removes it. The field begins doing less because less is required. Synchronicities change first. Early on, they are dramatic, attention-grabbing, almost theatrical. They serve a purpose then. They break doubt. They interrupt old assumptions. But once coherence settles, synchronicity becomes subtle. Ordinary. Almost unnoticeable. Not because it stopped, but because resistance did. Life starts flowing without needing to announce itself. Delays also change their character. They no longer feel obstructive or frustrating. They feel neutral. Sometimes they disappear entirely. Other times they appear briefly and resolve without emotional charge. This is because delay is not an external event. It is a reflection of internal oscillation. When oscillation ends, delay loses its function. One of the clearest signs of stabilized coherence is simplicity. Fewer complications. Fewer dramatic swings. Fewer extreme highs and lows. This is often misinterpreted as stagnation. It is not. It is efficiency. The system is no longer compensating for distortion, so it no longer produces excess motion. The field, in alignment, becomes conservative. It wastes nothing. Opportunities arrive closer to where you already are. Conversations clarify without effort. Decisions resolve themselves without internal debate. This is not because life has become smaller, but because signal is cleaner. Clean signal does not require excess expression. When people are misaligned, the field appears busy. Problems arise. Lessons repeat. Circumstances force attention. This activity is corrective. Once correction completes, the activity stops. The field does not need to keep intervening. It trusts the coherence it is reflecting. This is why chasing signs after alignment destabilizes the signal. You begin to look for confirmation that is no longer necessary. That looking introduces tension. Tension reintroduces noise. The field reflects the noise by becoming busy again. Not to reward seeking, but to match it. In stable alignment, things arrive on time rather than early or late. They fit instead of impress. They require less explanation. There is a sense of rightness without excitement. This calm is not boredom. It is precision. The system is no longer overcorrecting. You may notice that some things fall away quietly during this phase. Interests dissolve. Connections fade. Goals lose urgency. This is not loss. It is simplification. The field removes what no longer matches coherence automatically. There is no drama because there is no resistance. The most significant change is internal. You stop feeling managed by reality. There is no sense of being pushed or tested. Life responds proportionally. You act when action is needed. You wait when waiting is natural. Neither feels charged. This neutrality is alignment. The field doing less does not mean you do less. It means what you do carries more impact. Less effort. More accuracy. Less movement. More effect. This is the signature of coherence. When this phase arrives, the temptation is to interfere. To question. To adjust. To add meaning. But alignment does not require interpretation. It requires trust through non-interference. The field is no longer teaching. It is cooperating. When nothing feels dramatic, something important has stabilized. The system is working. Quietly. Precisely. Without waste. Before realization, there is a subtle assumption operating unnoticed. The assumption is that there is a field out there responding to you from a distance. That you are here, and it is there. That you influence it, persuade it, or interact with it. This assumption creates the final layer of separation. And this is where it dissolves. There was never an external field to influence. Influence implies distance. Distance implies division. Division is a perceptual artifact, not a structural truth. What you have been calling the quantum field is not an object responding to a subject. It is the unified expression of consciousness appearing as pattern. The moment this is seen, the idea of influence collapses. The subject-object split is the last illusion to fall. As long as you experience yourself as a subject attempting to shape an external reality, effort persists. Control persists. Even allowing can become strategic. But when the split dissolves, there is no one left to influence anything. There is only coherence recognizing itself through form. This does not remove experience. It clarifies it. The field was never responding to you. It was responding as you. What appeared as reflection was self-recognition operating through structure. You were never sending signals outward. You were stabilizing coherence inwardly, and experience reorganized accordingly because it could not do otherwise. This is why the language of manifestation eventually feels inaccurate. Manifestation implies creation from absence. Nothing was ever absent. Nothing was ever summoned. What changed was perception. Distortion dropped. Alignment revealed what was already present but inaccessible under strain. When the subject-object split collapses, effort becomes unnecessary because there is no longer a gap to bridge. Desire relaxes. Wanting softens. Not because life becomes empty, but because it becomes intimate. You are no longer trying to reach reality. You are recognizing yourself within it. This realization does not create passivity. It creates precision. Action still happens, but it is not driven by lack or fear. It arises naturally from coherence. There is no sense of manipulation. No sense of strategy. Life moves as a unified system rather than opposing forces. The idea of influencing reality was never wrong. It was incomplete. Influence was a stepping stone that pointed toward responsibility. Responsibility then dissolves into recognition. Recognition reveals unity. Unity makes influence obsolete. At this point, even the idea of alignment simplifies. There is nothing to align with. There is only the absence of resistance. When resistance ends, coherence is revealed as the default. The field does not respond because there is no longer a response mechanism needed. Experience simply unfolds according to its own intelligence. This is often felt as a deep quiet confidence. Not certainty about outcomes, but certainty about position. You are no longer orienting yourself relative to life. You are life, noticing itself. From here, trust is no longer a practice. It is automatic. The end of influence is not the end of creation. It is the end of interference. What remains is simplicity, clarity, and a sense of being exactly where you are without needing justification. Nothing is being managed anymore. Nothing is being asked. Nothing is being pushed. And yet, everything continues. Not because you are controlling the field, but because there was never a separation between you and it to begin with. Practice exists only while recognition is incomplete. Techniques arise as bridges, not destinations. They are useful until the moment they are no longer needed. When recognition occurs, the bridge dissolves naturally, not because it failed, but because it was crossed. Effort-based practices assume distance. They assume there is a state to reach, a coherence to build, an alignment to earn. As long as that assumption feels true, practices feel supportive. They create structure. They focus attention. They stabilize the system temporarily. But they also reinforce the identity of someone who must do something to become whole. Recognition removes that identity at the root. When it is seen that coherence was never absent, the motivation to practice collapses. Not in rebellion. In irrelevance. You do not stop practicing because you reject the practice. You stop because there is nothing left for it to accomplish. This often creates confusion. The mind asks whether something important has been lost. It wonders if discipline is slipping or if growth has stalled. But what is actually happening is graduation. The system no longer requires scaffolding. The signal is stable without support. Techniques are external regulators. Recognition is internal coherence. External regulation is helpful when the system oscillates. Once oscillation ends, regulation becomes interference. Continuing to practice from habit can reintroduce strain. The field reflects that strain as unnecessary complexity. This is why advanced recognition often feels simpler, quieter, even ordinary. There is no dramatic routine. No constant correction. Attention rests naturally. Presence does not need to be cultivated. It is default. Action arises when needed and subsides when not. This is not laziness. It is efficiency. Effort dissolves because effort was compensating for misidentification. When the misidentification is seen through, the compensation stops automatically. No decision is required. No discipline is abandoned. The system simply returns to equilibrium. This does not mean techniques were wrong. They served their purpose. They helped attention turn inward. They exposed patterns. They refined sensitivity. But clinging to them after recognition is like continuing to practice opening your eyes after waking up. The action is no longer relevant to the state. There is also a subtle relief here. A dropping of obligation. The sense that you no longer have to manage your inner world. Thoughts pass. Emotions move. Attention rests. Nothing needs to be maintained. The field does not require upkeep when coherence is present. Recognition replaces practice because recognition is not something you do. It is something that remains. It does not require repetition. It does not fade when unattended. Once seen, it becomes the reference point automatically. Life reorganizes around it without instruction. Some practices may still appear, but they arise spontaneously rather than from discipline. A walk. Silence. Movement. Rest. They are not performed to achieve a state. They express a state that is already stable. The difference is subtle but absolute. This is not the end of growth. It is the end of striving. Growth continues, but it unfolds rather than being forced. The field responds to this unfolding with ease. Less friction. Less noise. Less effort. Recognition does not take anything away. It removes what was unnecessary. What remains is simplicity without loss, clarity without strain, and a sense of being finished with seeking while fully alive within experience. Nothing has ended. Something has resolved. The field does not need to be sustained by effort. It continues because recognition has removed interference. This returns us to the opening truth: nothing began because of this understanding, and nothing needs to be maintained because of it. What changed was not reality. What changed was the absence of resistance to it. From the beginning, the field has been self-organizing. It has never required management, belief, or constant attention. Interference was the only variable. Interference came from misidentification, from effort, from the belief that something needed to be done to keep alignment intact. Recognition ended that belief. And with it, interference dissolved. Non-interference is not passivity. It is sovereignty. It is the position of no longer negotiating with reality. No longer trying to correct, adjust, or improve what is already functioning. Sovereignty does not push. It does not pull. It allows the natural intelligence of the system to operate without obstruction. This is why things begin to sustain themselves effortlessly after recognition. Not because you are doing something right, but because you are no longer doing something unnecessary. The field continues because coherence is uninterrupted. The mirror remains clear because nothing is being placed in front of it. You may notice that life feels less dramatic now. Less charged. Less urgent. This is not disengagement. It is stability. When interference ends, extremes soften. Peaks and valleys level out. Not into monotony, but into precision. Each movement has weight without strain. Each pause has meaning without doubt. Non-interference also means trusting timing without watching it. Watching reintroduces pressure. Pressure implies control. Control fragments coherence. When you stop monitoring outcomes, outcomes resolve on their own. The field does not require supervision. It requires space. This is why sovereignty feels quiet. There is no internal commentary narrating progress. No internal scoreboard measuring alignment. There is simply presence without agenda. From this position, action arises only when necessary, and when it does, it is clean. No friction. No second guessing. Nothing needs to be held together anymore. The system is self-stabilizing. Even moments of contraction resolve quickly because they are not resisted. Even uncertainty passes easily because it is not dramatized. Non-interference allows everything to complete itself. This is the final correction. Not learning how to influence reality better, but realizing there was never anything to influence. Not mastering technique, but stepping out of the way. Not achieving alignment, but recognizing that alignment was never absent. The field continues because it always has. You are no longer interrupting it with effort, fear, or control. This is what sovereignty looks like. Not dominance. Not detachment. Clarity without interference. There is nothing to maintain after this. Only something to notice when effort tries to return. And when it does, recognition dissolves it again, effortlessly. This is not the end of a process. It is the end of interference. Subscribe and share this with someone who needs to hear it before their timeline closes.